Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to look way past those pop culture stereotypes, the punk rock bands and smashed windows, to examine a highly structured, fiercely uncompromising, and honestly, deeply divided political philosophy: anarchism. It is so much more than just chaos. It's actually an incredibly rich intellectual tradition. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by decoding the word anarchy, look at its core themes, and then explore its radical split into the collectivist and individualist traditions before wrapping up with its historical legacy. All right, Section 1, decoding the word anarchy. Let's look at the myth versus the reality. So let's just address the elephant in the room right off the bat, right? In everyday language, we throw around the word anarchy as basically a synonym for absolute chaos, violence, and disorder. But if we stop and ask what anarchism actually is as a formal political philosophy, we find something completely different. Anarchists fiercely, and I mean fiercely, reject the idea that without a state, society just inevitably devolves into some violence, Mad Max wasteland. In fact, they fundamentally believe that organic order is perfectly possible without anyone forcing it upon us. The ideology actually gets its name from the Greek word anarchos, which literally translates to without rule. Central to the whole philosophy is this defining belief that people can manage their own affairs through voluntary agreement. Just think about how a community naturally organizes a neighborhood watch, right? Or a community garden, or even a mutual aid network after a big storm hits. Nobody is legally mandated to participate, and there isn't a mayor out there dictating the terms. Well, anarchists basically look to scale that horizontal voluntary organization all the way up to create a completely stateless society, totally free from top-down hierarchies. Moving on to Section 2. Core themes of anarchism, or the unifying beliefs. Take a look at this wonderfully punchy quote from the 19th century French social theorist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. It brilliantly illustrates the shared cornerstone of all anarchist thought, which is anti-statism. Anarchists view the state as an inherently evil, compulsory, and coercive authority. And honestly, when you read Proudhon's words today, in our current era of mass digital surveillance, algorithmic tracking, and sweeping government mandates, his critique feels remarkably modern, doesn't it? Because the state exercises absolute power and backs up its laws with the literal threat of punishment, anarchists argue that it just corrupts human nature and suppresses our essential freedom. So the philosophy essentially rests on a foundation of four main pillars. It starts with that anti-statism, but that total rejection of government relies really heavily on a profound trust in natural order, the idea that harmony arises completely naturally among rational and sociable humans. I mean, it takes immense optimism about human nature to believe we don't need laws to act decently toward one another. Then there's anti-clericalism. Historically, anarchists harbor deep objections to compulsory religious authority, basically viewing the church as just another pillar of state oppression that robs individuals of their moral autonomy. And finally, economic freedom. All anarchists reject modern managed capitalism. They want an economy where free individuals manage their own affairs, rather than just being cogs in some giant corporate or state machine. Now, what's really fascinating here is that anarchism isn't just some isolated island of thought. It actually sits right at the exact intersection where two deeply rival ideologies, socialism and liberalism, reach their ultimate anti-statist conclusions. And depending on which side of this philosophical divide you lean toward, you're going to get a completely different version of what an anarchist society should actually look like. That brings us to Section 3, the collectivist tradition. This is where we see socialism pushed to its absolute limits. Let's dive into our first major branch. The collectivist tradition is what happens when you take socialist principles of human solidarity and push them all the way. Mikhail Bakunin famously declared that social solidarity is the very first human law. Collectivists genuinely believe that a fully equal communist society requires the immediate and final abolition of the state. And this actually created a massive historical rift with Karl Marx. Bakunin absolutely hated the Marxist idea of a temporary dictatorship of the proletariat, and he accurately warned that a workers' state would just create a brand new ruling class of bureaucrats. He argued that state power, once it's established, would never just willingly wither away. To replace the state entirely, collectivists proposed several really fascinating models. First up is mutualism, which involves a system of completely fair exchange. Think mutual credit banks where workers trade labor time rather than capital. This completely eliminates middleman profiteering. Next is anarcho-syndicalism. Here, revolutionary trade unions act as the main vehicle for change. So instead of voting in elections, they advocate for direct action, like a massive general strike, with the goal of completely paralyzing and dismantling the state. And ultimately, there is anarcho-communism, championed by Peter Kropotkin,
who, by the way, used biology to argue that mutual aid, not brutal competition, is the real driver of evolution. This model envisions small, self-managing communes based entirely on direct democracy and the pure communal ownership of wealth.
Now, for a complete 180, Section 4, the individualist tradition. This is pushing liberalism to its extreme.
So we are pivoting to the completely opposite side of the spectrum now. The absolute core concept here is the sovereign individual. Individualist anarchists believe that absolute and unlimited authority resides uniquely within each human being. Therefore, if every single person has absolute moral authority over themselves, well then any government constraint, any tax, any law is, by definition, an absolute evil. For them, individualism and the state are just completely irreconcilable. This tradition champions pure personal autonomy, and it takes several pretty wild forms. On one extreme, you've got Max Stirner's egoism, which places the individual self at the absolute center of the moral universe, totally ignoring all social conventions and obligations. Then you have Henry David Thoreau's philosophy of civil disobedience. You might remember Thoreau famously went to jail for refusing to pay a poll tax that funded the Mexican-American War. He argued that individual conscience sits way above political obligation, a concept that, by the way, deeply influenced modern civil rights movements. Finally, there's anarcho-capitalism. Thinkers like Murray Rothbard argued that literally all functions of the state should be fully privatized. In his vision, even the courts and the police are replaced by competitive free markets and private defense agencies. Just take a second to think about the sheer breadth of this ideology. You have Mikhail Bakunin, a fiercely anti-capitalist, anti-theological revolutionary who wants to abolish private property entirely, sitting in the exact same philosophical camp as Murray Rothbard, an Austrian school economist and absolute champion of extreme free market capitalism. Yet, both of these fiercely opposed thinkers sit squarely under the overarching anarchist umbrella, united by one single defining belief: the state is fundamentally illegitimate. When you put these internal tensions side by side, the clash is honestly pretty stark. You have the collectivist side pushing for ultra-socialism, common ownership, and massive social revolution. On the flip side, the individualists are striving for ultra-liberalism, vehemently defending private property and advocating for civil disobedience and intense personal autonomy. It's essentially organism versus atomism, social solidarity versus the sovereign individual. Which leads us nicely into Section 5. Tensions and legacy, or anarchism in action. So you might be wondering, what is the actual legacy of all this theory? Well, anarchism remains really unusual among major political ideologies because it has literally never succeeded in winning power at a national level. But they did come incredibly close once. During the Spanish Civil War, starting in 1936, millions of workers spontaneously set up leaderless, self-managed collectives all across Spain. In massive cities like Barcelona, entire public utilities, transport systems, and factories were entirely run by workers' syndicates operating without any bosses. It was this monumental, grassroots realization of anarcho-syndicalist ideas functioning on a massive, massive scale. Now, obviously, that Spanish experiment was tragically short-lived, ultimately crushed by a combination of fascist forces and rival communist factions. But anarchism refuses to die. It endures not really as a conventional political party, but as a powerful, living critique of power. I mean, you can see its DNA everywhere today, in decentralized cryptocurrency networks, in the horizontal organization of open-source software communities, and absolutely in the mutual aid networks that spring up during natural disasters. Its uncompromising rejection of corrupt authority just holds a very strong continuing moral appeal. And that really leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. Is a world running entirely without compulsory authority simply a naive utopian fantasy? Or is it a vital standard of true freedom, a mirror we should be continually holding up to measure our own societies against? Well, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it provided a clearer lens through which to view the complex, deeply intellectual, and fascinating world of anarchism.